So this is the Linux version of this review. This is the HP G1A. This is a monstrous 16-core, 128 gig laptop. 3.5 pounds. It's thin and light. It's this experience with this laptop was unlike anything that I was prepared for, and the Linux experience is actually a better experience than the Windows experience on this. You're gonna have to put some work into it, but let's take a closer look. So I'm running Arch Linux on this. Arch Linux is not officially supported. HP does actually qualify Ubuntu 24.04 LTS to be specific. And because of that, the fingerprint reader works. Fprint. I was able to enroll my fingerprints and all of that works. The touchpad. This is the best in class laptop. This is probably the best touchpad experience that I've ever had on any laptop, Linux or otherwise, ever. In Windows it's pretty good. In Linux it is a standout. It's doing all of the stuff in hardware. The OLED 120 Hz display is phenomenal. It is glossy, and so if I might digress for a second to talk about the display, 2880 by 1800, and using it in daylight is a little bit of a challenge, or using it in a studio where there's really reflective lights is a little bit of a challenge. However, because it is OLED, you can turn the brightness up a lot, and it's very sharp because of the glossy coating. So it's a little bit of a give and take situation. A 2880 by 1800 with the brightness turned up a lot, you can see it a lot better than lower brightness displays. Yes, you're going to have to use display scaling of some description, and yes, Linux uneven display scaling is still far from perfect. I ran this at about 125 to 150% scaling with KDE under Arch, and generally I was pretty happy with that, but still running it at native resolutions. And for gaming, I was doing 1440 by 900 generally enjoyed 60 to 110 FPS, give or take, which we'll talk more about the gaming performance and all that other stuff later, because, you know, why not? Why wouldn't you? Gaming's a lot of fun. You can get a lot done with gaming. Gaming. My adventures with this laptop were such that I really thought that the world might benefit from a guide on installing Arch and configuring it on this laptop in order to get the most out of it. If you order it from HP with Ubuntu, I'm sure they've done a bunch of work to be able to support it. Strictly speaking, the guide that I've written would work great for other Strix Halo products. This is the Ryzen AI Max 395 Plus. That's a mouthful of a processor name, 128 gigabytes of memory, but it's the Strix Halo platform from AMD. And so the guide that I've written generally would apply to other implementations of Strix Halo, not necessarily from HP, but from other vendors as well. Just the Strix Halo 395 Plus is going to start to show up in a lot of products, I suspect. So you can adapt my guide and use that, but my guide really is built for this laptop. And this laptop is glorious. Before we get into the guide, there's a couple other things that I want to touch on hardware-wise. One, it's got a Type A port. On this side, a single Type A port. And sort of manhandling it for the camera, I've sort of squeezed a little bit too hard on one side. There's a Type C USB 4 port as well on this side, as well as a Kensington lock port. And then on this side we have a full-size HDMI, two more USB Type C, one of which is USB 4, and the other one is 20 gigabit, and a combination TRRS headphone jack, which is great. There's also a microphone disable on the keyboard, which actually works correctly, and at least the light lights up and lets you know. All of the other keyboard controls for keyboard backlight control, as well as screen brightness, all of that worked with this kernel. Even the MediaTek wireless. I could digress for 10 minutes, probably, and talk about the MediaTek adventures. MediaTek on Linux, there's no way around it. It has not been a good experience for many years. Every time there's a new laptop that comes out from AMD that uses MediaTek, it is always an uphill battle with lots of teeth gnashing and bleeding to get MediaTek working correctly. As of this video, kernel 6.14.3 and the May 1st Linux-firmware package for Arch is the promised land of reasonable MediaTek performance. There are still quirks with PCIe ASPM, and there are still problems that need to be fixed, but it's at least usable. If you run into problems, you can RM mod and ins mod the 7529 kernel module, the kernel module for the MediaTek wireless, and it'll work again. There's some bugs around IPv6 that I found. There's actually a lot of bugs that I found. You can check out the forum thread if you want to get into it. And if it's because I sound happy, even though I'm sort of complaining about all this stuff, is that about 3 weeks ago, I was about 500% more frustrated with the wireless solution. I had to go down a rabbit hole. It turns out there was a link to the Linux kernel mailing list, and also Phoronix, Michael Larble, wrote up a nice article on that. He also did some benchmarks on this. You should check those out because those get more into the nitty-gritty of specific applications and packages, because 16 cores and 128 gigabytes of memory. This is an absolutely monstrous machine, but MediaTek is the roughest aspect of this. Otherwise, everything actually works pretty fine. Before we get started, if you ordered the laptop without an operating system, you're ready to go because it's in secure boot like install mode. If you ordered the laptop with an operating system, then you have to go into the BIOS and go to secure boot and clear the secure boot keys in order to put it into secure boot mode. And this is also what to do in case secure boot messes up like we do. We're going to do some steps in the guide in a little while. And if something goes wrong, or you get a secure boot prevents me from doing this, or you get like grub rescue type errors, you can just go back into the BIOS and clear the keys again, and then it doesn't enforce secure boot. So you need to put the system into operating install mode effectively. Now when you do that, the BIOS is going to warn you that you're doing something crazy, and you have to enter a 4-digit code, and then you hit enter and the laptop beeps at you. But that's okay. That's okay. Let's get on with the rest of the guide. Alright, the big thing for me is I want properly working suspend resume. I want hibernate. Windows 11 is still a dumpster fire when it's like, oh, you closed the laptop. Did you close the laptop with the power brick plugged in or not plugged in? That makes a difference. I don't know why it takes a decade to fix those kinds of bugs, but it does. Linux, at this point, is a better hibernate suspend resume experience, assuming that you have a qualified no regression Linux kernel that you're dealing with, than Windows, period. Like I think people probably buy Mac laptops just to get the suspend wake experience, which is sort of interesting but also slightly horrifying, and maybe a study about human anthropology. But anyway, it works great on this. This has been, with the kernel and the updates and the guide and everything that I did, this has been the most reliable laptop that I have ever had for Linux in terms of suspend resume and wake and sleep. And that's only been true in like the last week, and it's only been true because of the hard work of a lot of other people and me just sort of cobbling it together. So, for our Arch setup, taking into account like how I did the disk is sort of important. It's BTRFS for the file system, but I'm actually using a swap partition, and yeah, with 128 gigabytes of memory, or maybe you opted for the 64 gigabyte model, which I think is, unless you specifically need 128 gigabytes of memory, 64 gigs is probably the more unreasonable thing for an unreasonable monstrous workstation. But if you want to go whole enchilada for 128 gigabytes, yeah, that's fine. When we do our Arch install, we start with the networking part of it. The Arch Wiki should be used as a reference for this, not just you should read the Arch Wiki and understand it, but then once with an understanding of the Arch Wiki, then this guide is actually useful for you. Then the disk partitioning. So I use cgdisk to configure /dev/nvme0n1, created a 512 megabyte or a 900 megabyte EFI partition. I know that home partitions are nice, but we're going to actually use BTRFS subvolumes, so hang in there with me for a minute. And we're going to make a swap partition that is a little larger than 128 gigabytes of memory. You can exact size it to 128 gigs, but if it's just slightly smaller than memory, because cgdisk sometimes will be like a sector or two short, at least in the past it has been for whatever reason. So yeah, and finally we're going to create that swap partition. Then we want to create the file systems, and that's what the next part of the guide is, just mkfs and mkswap. You do need to do this step now because we need the GUIDs when we create the fs tab file for the next part of the guide, but there you go. Now, subvolumes and snapshots. We can go ahead and mount what will be the root volume, the partition 2 at /mnt, but we can't pack strap just yet. We need to actually create the subvolumes. Now, this is the thing, if you're familiar with Linux and BTRFS and subvolumes, the old way, we could actually create snapshots right now in this step, and the snapshots is a volume that most people by convention usually just call it at. Don't do that here. Snapper wants to do that later. So, I'm just letting you know. If you already knew what you were doing, don't trip over that. Otherwise, we're going to create subvolumes for home, log, cache, and pkg. Alright, so once that's done, we can go ahead and mount all of those. And you can see what I have in mind now for the different snapshots when we look at the different paths that I'm mounting these at. So From there, we can generate our file system tab. You should check your fs/mnt, etc. fs tab. Now remember, when we packstrap, that /mnt is going to become slash. It's going to become your root file system. But it's also important from here not to reboot the system, because secure boot is going to be another dimension of crazy. And you definitely don't want to reboot, because you could get into a situation where you have to reinstall, or you can't reboot, or secure boot is broken, or whatever. So for the rest of the Arch install, we're ready to packstrap. We've got our subvolumes mounted, and /mnt is looking like it's going to, and it has all the subfile systems mounted. So from here we can packstrap. The key step there is arch chroot /mnt, and then from there we'll set up locale and the time zones and the host file, and you want to also systemctl enable network manager, because we'll need that whenever you reboot. But don't reboot yet. You got to finish configuring the system. Now remember when we disabled secure boot? Well, we just cleared the keys. We didn't really disable secure boot. Secure boot's still enabled, but it's in operating system install mode, and you can see that from the sbctl status output. We're going to create keys for our laptop, and then we're going to enroll the keys -m. So that's going to enroll the keys we just made, and also Microsoft's keys, because you might be going to dual boot or something like that. I don't know. Now before we reboot, we're also going to configure grub. So we want to do grub mkconfig and output to /boot/grub/grub.configuration, or grub configuration. Then we're going to do grub install. And the grub install parameters here are particularly important, especially the TPM module, and especially disabling the shim lock. You might as well go ahead and do systemctl enable grub-btrfs.path, because when snapshots, like, we have to finish configuring snapshots later, but the idea is that if something goes horribly wrong with your system, you can actually boot to a snapshot from a specific point in time. But we're not really done configuring that. We're just trying to get the secure boot part of that done for right now, but that's what that is. So if you're not doing the snapshots thing, you can just skip that step. Theoretically, I hope, sort of, kind of, fingers crossed, we're ready to reboot the system, and it should come up normally. If it doesn't come up normally, skip to the secure boot troubleshooting section. And then from here, you can configure the rest of your system. Now, for the benchmarks for this, for AI, like, yes, it's fast. It's not absurdly fast. I think a Mac laptop, like a Mac Pro Max right now today, is faster. If we talk about memory bandwidth, so when we talk about, like, it's really, in a best case scenario, it's going to come down to how much memory bandwidth does this thing have, and that is 215 gigabytes per second, which is insane. If you want to go down this rabbit hole, I want to turn you on to the Rockham GitHub repository, because this is what you need to be building and doing against if you're using Rockham on the AMD platform for the AI stuff and everything else. Also, one of the problems on Windows, one of the things that sort of hobbles the performance, is this idea of, like, you know, hybrid access mode, where the 8060S GPU in this, which is like this is an absurd GPU. We haven't even talked about the GPU yet. We'll talk about that more in the gaming section. But the GPU in this is a phenomenal GPU, and it's built into the CPU. It's an APU. But it is as powerful as a discrete laptop GPU. It's as powerful as a 4060M in most scenarios. It is more powerful than a 4060M in some other scenarios. To get the most mileage out of this platform in that scenario, the GPU and the CPU, they share memory, but in some scenarios for AI, that is an advantage. You don't have to copy things from system memory to the GPU. And so that is what the hybrid system architecture, and this is one of the things that Apple has leveraged really well with their M1, M2, M3, M4 laptops. And we see AMD making strides on investments they made in hybrid architecture type approaches years ago. And so this laptop is not all the way there yet, but it is much farther along than I expected, let's say. Rockham is another layer of complication on top of that, but again, in the last year to 18 months, AMD has come a country mile in what they've done with the Rockham platform and making it accessible and usable and that kind of stuff. And they're just throwing more bodies at the problem, because customers are buying more Rockham stuff in the enterprise, and it sort of is trickling down in hardware like this that's 3.5 pounds. Another way to explain that is gaming. And so if we launch Steam and we play Doom Eternal, yeah, this thing doesn't have a GPU, but it's doing 100 FPS on high-tier graphical settings in Doom Eternal at 1440 by 900. Yeah, and it can play native at 2880 by 1800. It's going to be a little slower, but you know, 1440 by 900 is like a doubling. It's like a 2x, and so that can look really well. You also have technologies like FSR to do scaling, and that works really well on this platform. So if you want to do gaming and gaming workloads, this shows you that this has the horsepower to do those types of computations that are useful for games as well as AI. And yes, with Arch, all you gotta do is enable multilib. That's in the guide. Just comment out multilib, install Steam, start installing your games. The most recent version of Mesa, you know, there's not really a lot of hoops that you have to jump through on Arch to have a first-class gaming experience with this. Just start installing games, and they work. There's only 4 screws to take the bottom off. It sort of snaps on and off. The only serviceable part in here really is the SSD and the battery. The battery is user serviceable. You can replace it. HP actually has a service manual. You should check that out. That's also linked in the guide, and you can get an idea of repairability of the other stuff. There is another aspect of this too that's really interesting, is that the Power Balancing Act has been another thing that AMD has had to figure out. And the Power Balancing Act on Linux is a better experience right now on Windows as well, because what I mean by the Power Balancing Act is if you're playing a game, you can basically turn off all your cores, but like 4 or 6 of them, and then put most of the power into the GPU. The display can run at 120 hertz because it's OLED, but if you set limits, use like TLP or something like that in Arch, you can configure the whole system to consume on the order of 20-25 watts, and then you'll get 3 or 4 hours of gaming out of it. On Linux, the battery life performance window can be as little as an hour and 45 minutes. In my heaviest usage, I was still getting 4 to 6 hours out of it. If I start the day with some conservative settings with TLP, like telling TLP to manage my power and manage my clocks and that sort of stuff, even running the brightness at 3/4 of the way up, I could get 8 hours out of this platform. If I really stretch, but actually using it, I can get upwards of 10, which is better than I could do on Windows. But I think real world, like 4 to 6 hours for a power user is about what you're going to get in terms of battery life and power usage. And if that sounds a little labored, it's because historically, Linux has not really been a super first-class citizen. It's like, oh, you got a Linux laptop, plug it in. That has also come a long way. I'm sure that is a lot of HP engineering. I'm sure that is a lot of AMD engineering and kernel hackery, and it shows off. Good job, engineering team. You know, we need to keep improving. There's I want double this battery life the next time we have this much of a generational leap. It's probably Zen 7, I'm guessing, but by Zen 7, I want a 16-hour battery life when we're talking about a battery that's on the order of 75 watt hours, give or take. And that's pretty much it. That's pretty much it. That's what I've got for the Linux review of this. If you have a Strix Halo machine, not necessarily this one, and you're looking for a guide to set up secure boot and working suspend, resume, and hibernate, that's probably going to apply to the other Strix Halo devices, not just HP. So you can take that. Maybe we can fork that guide into level 1 forums, or if you pick one of these up and you want to show it off, or let us know what kind of things you're working on, or what sort of interesting things you've discovered, definitely hit us up in the forum. I'm Wendell. This is level 1. I'm signing out, and I'll see you there.